The wind howled like a wounded animal as Belle Sutton stumbled through the dense pine forest, her torn dress catching on branches that seemed to reach for her with gnarled fingers. 3 days had passed since her stagecoach was ambushed, or was it 4? Time blurred together in a haze of hunger and exhaustion as the Rocky Mountains of Colorado loomed endlessly around her. It had been a crisp morning in April 1876 when Belle left Denver, bound for San Bernardino, California. At 22, she was finally striking out on her own, answering an advertisement for a schoolteacher position. Her parents had begged her to reconsider. A proper Boston lady had no business traveling alone to the untamed West. But Belle's spirit yearned for adventure and purpose beyond the suffocating confines of society parlors. Now, as the cruel mountain wind cut through her tattered clothes, she wondered if her parents had been right after all. The stagecoach attack came without warning. Bandits, faces obscured by bandanas, had appeared from behind the rocks. In the chaos, Belle had fled into the wilderness, terrified and alone. Her stomach cramped painfully, reminding her that the few berries she'd managed to forage earlier were woefully inadequate. Belle sank to her knees beside a small stream, cupping her hands to drink the icy water. The pristine mountain landscape that had initially awed her now seemed a vast, indifferent prison. Tears welled in her eyes as she contemplated the very real possibility that she would die here, her bones discovered years later by some passing trapper or miner. "I will not give up," she whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. Belle forced herself to her feet, ignoring the blisters that had formed and burst on her once delicate hands. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in deceptively beautiful shades of orange and purple. She needed shelter before night fell and the mountain predators began their hunt. 50 miles away in the small settlement of Timber Creek, Jack Taylor tightened the cinch on his chestnut stallion saddle. At 30 years old, Jack had seen enough of life to know its harsh realities. The Civil War had taken his youth, and the decade since had been spent building a reputation as one of the most skilled trackers in Colorado territory. His weathered face rarely revealed emotion, but there was a softness in his blue eyes that hinted at a gentler nature beneath his rugged exterior. "You sure about this, Taylor?" Sheriff Whitman leaned against the hitching post, his gray mustache twitching with concern. "That stagecoach was hit 4 days ago. If the bandits didn't get her, the mountains surely have by now." Jack adjusted his worn leather hat, eyes scanning the distant peaks. "Someone's gotta try, Sheriff. Can't let a lady die alone out there without making an effort." "Your funeral," the sheriff muttered, though there was respect in his voice. "The Farley gang ain't known for leaving witnesses, and that's assuming the wolves and bears haven't found her first." Jack mounted his horse in one fluid motion, years of experience evident in his movements. "I'll find whatever there is to find. That's my promise." He set out as the town began to disappear behind him, leading a packhorse loaded with supplies. Jack had no personal connection to Belle Sutton. He'd never even laid eyes on her, but something about the thought of an Eastern lady alone in these unforgiving mountains stirred a protective instinct in him. The stage driver who'd stumbled into town, shot in the shoulder but alive, had recounted how the young woman had fled into the forest during the attack. "Smart," Jack murmured to himself as he urged his horse up the steep trail. Running had given her a chance, however slim. Most city folk would have surrendered immediately, placing their fate in the hands of merciless bandits. As darkness fell on his first day of tracking, Jack made camp in a sheltered hollow. He built a small fire, careful to keep it controlled, not wanting to announce his presence to anyone who might be watching. The Farley gang was still out there, and they wouldn't take kindly to someone interfering with their handiwork. While his coffee boiled in the battered tin pot, Jack unfolded a crude map of the region. The stagecoach had been ambushed here, near Serpent Pass. A city woman on foot would likely follow the easiest path downhill, toward water. But that assumed she knew which way was which after fleeing in panic. He sipped the bitter coffee, his mind constructing possibilities. If she was smart, and the stage driver had mentioned she was headed west to become a schoolteacher, so she had some education, she might have tried to follow the sun. If she was still alive, finding water would have been her priority. "First light," he promised the darkness, "we'll find your trail." Miles away, Belle huddled in the hollow of a lightning-struck tree, her arms wrapped around herself for warmth. She had managed to start a small fire using techniques she'd read about in adventure novels, striking rocks together over a nest of dry pine needles and twigs. The tiny flame provided little heat, but gave her something to focus on besides her fear. "One day at a time," she whispered, recalling her father's favorite expression. Belle had always considered it trite, but now those words became a lifeline. She would survive one more day and then another until she found her way back to civilization. She thought of the small journal in her pocket, the one possession she'd managed to keep with her during her flight. In it, she'd been recording her westward journey, full of optimistic observations about her new life. Now, it served as a testament to her determination. By the flickering firelight, she scratched a few words with a charred stick. "Day 4, I think. Still alive. Found water. Tomorrow I will find people." Morning brought a brief respite from Belle's hunger as she discovered a patch of wild strawberries growing in a sunny clearing. The tiny fruits barely took the edge off her hunger, but they gave her the strength to continue walking. She had decided to follow the stream downhill, reasoning that water eventually led to settlements. The terrain was challenging, with slippery rocks and fallen trees creating natural obstacles. By midday, exhaustion forced her to rest. Belle sat on a mossy boulder, removing her boots to examine her blistered feet. The fine leather shoes, suitable for Boston sidewalks, had not been designed for wilderness trekking. She tore strips from her petticoat to wrap around the worst of the blisters. As she worked, a sound froze her in place, the unmistakable growl of an animal. Slowly, Belle raised her head to find herself being watched by a mountain lion perched on a rock ledge 20 feet away. The magnificent predator's tawny coat shimmered in the dappled sunlight as it observed her with calculating amber eyes. Belle's heart thundered in her chest, but some distant memory of a natural history lecture surfaced in her mind. "Don't run," she whispered to herself, fighting every instinct screaming at her to flee. Instead, she slowly rose to her feet, making herself appear as large as possible. With shaking hands, she grabbed a nearby branch and held it above her head. "Go away." She shouted with all the authority she could muster. "Leave me alone." The mountain lion's tail flicked with interest, but it didn't advance. Belle continued to shout and wave the branch, her voice echoing through the canyon. After what felt like an eternity, the magnificent cat turned and disappeared into the undergrowth. Belle collapsed back onto the boulder, her entire body trembling with residual fear and adrenaline. The encounter had sapped what little energy she had left. She needed to find shelter soon, somewhere more secure than last night's hollow tree. Jack Taylor dismounted at the sight of the stagecoach attack, his experienced eyes taking in details others might miss. 4 days of mountain weather had obscured much, but not everything. He crouched near where the stage had stopped, fingers lightly touching the disturbed earth. 6 men, at least, he murmured to himself. The graves of 2 passengers had been hastily dug nearby. The Farley gang wasn't completely without honor, it seemed. They killed when necessary, but didn't leave bodies to rot in the open. Jack circled the area methodically, reading the story written in broken twigs and scuffed earth. He found what he was looking for at the edge of the clearing, the tracks of smaller boots, heading east into the forest. Not the logical direction if she were trying to reach the next station, but fear rarely followed logic. "There you are, Miss Sutton," he said softly, leading his horses. Jack followed the trail. The woman had crashed through the undergrowth without attempt at concealment, making his job easier. Still, 4 days of wind and weather had diminished the signs. Every 100 yards, he had to stop and search carefully for the next indication of her passage, a broken stem here, a scuffed rock there. By late afternoon, he reached a rocky outcrop where the trail disappeared. Jack frowned, scanning the area carefully. She had stopped here. He could see where she had sat down, but then her tracks vanished. The rocky ground wouldn't hold footprints. Jack removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow as he considered the terrain from her perspective. Ahead lay two possible paths, a game trail leading uphill or a steeper descent toward what might be a water source. "What did you choose?" he wondered aloud. His answer came in the form of a scrap of fabric caught on a thorny bush along the downhill path. Jack carefully retrieved it, fine cotton, too delicate for these mountains. "A piece of a lady's garment, smart girl," he murmured. Following the water. The stream she had found led Jack deeper into the valley. The signs of her passage grew fresher, a day old, perhaps less. Her path had become more deliberate, following the water with purpose rather than fleeing in panic. As dusk approached, Jack discovered the remnants of a small fire in a lightning-struck tree hollow. He crouched, touching the ashes. Cold, but relatively recent. He examined the shelter with newfound respect. The woman had found one of the safer places to spend a night in the wilderness, protected from wind and with good visibility of approaching threats. "You're a survivor, Miss Sutton," he said to the empty hollow. "Hold on a bit longer." He made camp nearby, deciding against tracking further in the fading light. In the morning, he would find her one way or another. The next day brought disaster for Belle. Following the stream, she had encountered a steep waterfall with no safe path down. Attempting to find a way around, she had ventured away from the water and become disoriented in a maze of similar-looking pine trees and rock formations. By midday, she realized she was thoroughly lost. The overcast sky concealed the sun's position, robbing her of even that basic navigational tool. Panic clawed at her throat as she forced herself to stop walking and think rationally. "Water," she whispered. "I need to find water again." Belle tried to remember what she'd read about wilderness survival. Streams often ran downhill through valleys. She studied the terrain, looking for the dip of a valley floor, but the mountainous landscape offered few obvious clues. A distant rumble of thunder prompted her to look up at the darkening sky. The threat of a storm added urgency to her need for shelter. Belle began walking downhill, hoping to reach the valley floor before the rain started. The storm broke with sudden violence. Lightning cracked across the sky as rain poured down in blinding sheets. Belle stumbled forward, her sodden dress weighing her down as she searched desperately for any form of shelter. The ground beneath her feet, turned to mud by the downpour, suddenly gave way. Belle screamed as she slid down a steep embankment, tumbling through undergrowth until she slammed against a fallen tree. Pain shot through her ankle as she tried to stand. Lightning illuminated her surroundings for a brief moment, revealing a small cave entrance in the rocky hillside nearby. Gritting her teeth against the pain, Belle crawled toward it, seeking any escape from the storm's fury. The shallow cave provided blessed relief from the rain, though water still dripped through cracks in the ceiling. Belle huddled against the back wall, examining her injured ankle by touch. It wasn't broken, she could still move it, but the swelling suggested a severe sprain. "Perfect," she muttered bitterly. Her chances of survival, already slim, had diminished further. Without the ability to walk properly, finding food and water would become nearly impossible. As night fell, the temperature dropped precipitously. Belle's wet clothes clung to her shivering body, drawing precious heat away. She tried to remove her outer garments to wring them out, but her fingers had grown too numb to manage the buttons. In the darkness of the cave, Belle Sutton faced the stark reality of her situation. "I don't want to die alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm's rage. For the first time since the stagecoach attack, she allowed herself to cry not the few frightened tears of previous nights, but deep, wrenching sobs that echoed her despair. The storm complicated Jack's tracking efforts considerably. He had followed Belle's trail to the waterfall, noting with approval her attempt to find a way around rather than risking the treacherous descent. but the rain had washed away most signs of her passage beyond that point. Jack pulled his slicker tighter around himself, water streaming from the brim of his hat as he studied the muddy ground. Years of tracking had taught him to read even the faintest signs, but the deluge was erasing them before his eyes. "Think, Taylor," he muttered. "Where would she go?" The answer came not from tracking skills but from understanding human nature. Lost, confused, in unfamiliar terrain, she would have headed downhill, seeking the path of least resistance. Leading his horses carefully along the slippery slope, Jack worked his way down the hillside. The storm's intensity increased, forcing him to consider making camp, but something drove him forward, a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, and Jack spotted something unnatural among the rocks and trees below, a splash of color that didn't belong. He urged his horse forward, squinting through the rain. It was fabric, the same fine cotton as the scrap he'd found earlier. Jack dismounted, examining the torn piece caught on a thorny bush. Beyond it, he could see signs of a recent landslide where the rain's softened ground had given way. "Miss Sutton," he called out, his voice barely carrying over the storm's fury. "Belle Sutton," only the howling wind answered him. Jack secured his horses to a sturdy pine, then carefully made his way down the muddy slope, following the path of disturbed earth and broken vegetation. At the bottom, boot prints partially filled with water but unmistakably fresh led toward a rocky outcropping. Another lightning flash revealed the small cave entrance. Jack approached cautiously, aware that mountain caves often housed predators seeking shelter from storms. "Miss Sutton." He called again, louder this time. "I've come from Timber Creek to find you." Inside the cave, Belle froze at the sound of a human voice. Delirium from cold and hunger had set in, and she feared her mind was playing cruel tricks. "Hello," she called weakly, her voice cracking. "Is someone there?" Jack's heart leaped at the response. "Yes, madam, Jack Taylor's my name. The stagecoach driver made it to town and told us what happened." He ducked into the cave entrance, removing his hat as he approached the huddled figure. In the dim light filtering through the opening, he could see she was in bad shape, soaked through, shivering violently, her face pale beneath smudges of dirt. "You're real," Belle whispered, staring at him with wide, disbelieving eyes. "I thought I was imagining things." "I'm real enough, Miss Sutton." Jack knelt beside her, shrugging off his slicker. "And you're alive, which is more than most would have wagered after 5 days out here." 5 days. Had it really been that long, Belle had lost track of time completely. Jack wrapped his dry slicker around her shoulders, his weathered face creasing with concern as he felt how cold she was. "We need to get you warm and dry. Can you stand?" Belle attempted to rise but gasped as pain shot through her ankle. "I fell," she explained. "I don't think it's broken, but I can't put much weight on it." Jack nodded, making a quick assessment of the situation. The storm showed no signs of abating and night had fallen. Moving her now in her weakened condition would be dangerous. "We'll stay here tonight," he decided. "I've got supplies on my horses. First thing, though, you need dry clothes and something hot in your belly." He disappeared briefly, returning with saddlebags and a small bundle of firewood he'd kept dry under a tarp. With efficient movements, Jack built a small fire near the cave entrance, positioning it where the smoke would be drawn outside while the heat reflected inward. From his supplies, he produced a flannel shirt and woolen trousers. "They'll be too big, but they're dry," he said, turning his back to give her privacy. "There's a blanket there, too. I'll step outside while you change." Belle hesitated only briefly before modesty gave way to the desperate need for dry clothing. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons of her dress, stiff with cold. "Could you?" she began hesitantly, embarrassed by her weakness. "Could you help with these buttons?" "My hands won't work properly." Jack turned, his expression professionally neutral as he helped with the buttons at her back. He kept his eyes averted as much as possible, preserving her dignity while providing necessary assistance. Once the buttons were undone, he immediately stepped outside to give her privacy for the rest. Alone in the cave, Belle struggled out of her sodden garments, leaving on her chemise for minimal modesty. She pulled on Jack's flannel shirt, which hung to her knees, and wrapped the woolen blanket around her lower half, unable to manage the trousers with her injured ankle. "I'm decent," she called softly. Jack returned, his gaze quickly assessing her condition. The color was returning to her face, but she still shivered. He busied himself preparing a tin cup of coffee from his supplies, adding a generous spoonful of sugar. "Drink this," he instructed, handing her the steaming cup. "It'll warm you from the inside." Belle took the cup with both hands, savoring the heat that seeped into her palms before taking a cautious sip. The hot, sweet liquid seemed like the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger now. "For finding me, for coming at all." Jack nodded, uncomfortable with gratitude. He focused instead on practical matters, examining her injured ankle with gentle but capable hands. "Nasty sprain," he confirmed. "We'll need to wrap it properly in the morning." He rummaged in his saddlebags, producing jerky and hardtack. "Not much of a feast, but it'll keep your strength up." Belle accepted the food gratefully, though she forced herself to eat slowly, remembering cautionary tales about starved people becoming ill from eating too quickly. As warmth and nourishment began to revive her, curiosity overcame exhaustion. "How did you find me?" she asked. "The mountains are so vast." Jack settled back against the cave wall, feeding small sticks into the fire. "Tracking's what I do, been at it since the war ended. Stage driver said you ran east when the Farley gang hit your coach. I picked up your trail from there." The Farley gang. Belle's hand trembled slightly, spilling a drop of coffee. "What happened to the other passengers?" Jack hesitated, weighing how much to tell her. "Two didn't make it," he said finally. "Driver was wounded but got away, don't know about the others." Belle closed her eyes briefly, processing this information. "There was an elderly couple and a salesman," she said softly. "It happened so fast. There was shooting and the driver was yelling for us to run. I just ran." "You did right," Jack assured her. "Staying would have been a death sentence. The Farley gang doesn't leave witnesses as a rule. Yet they let the driver go. He got lucky. Took a bullet in the shoulder but managed to get to his shotgun. Wounded one of them badly enough that they broke off the attack." Jack's expression darkened. "They've been terrorizing the trails between Denver and the western settlements for 2 years now. Sheriff's got a federal marshal coming next month with a proper posse." Belle's eyelids began to droop as exhaustion overtook her. Jack noticed immediately and took the empty cup from her hands. "Get some rest, Miss Sutton. We've got a hard journey ahead tomorrow." "Belle," she murmured sleepily. "Please call me Belle." "Belle then." Jack's voice softened slightly. "Sleep now, you're safe." As Belle drifted into the first secure sleep she'd had in days, Jack remained vigilant, stoking the fire and listening to the storm rage outside. He studied her face in the firelight, delicate features showing surprising strength beneath the exhaustion and dirt. Her long auburn hair, drying near the fire, caught the light with hints of gold. Jack Taylor had rescued lost travelers before, but something about Belle Sutton stirred protective instincts beyond professional duty. Perhaps it was her remarkable survival against odds that would have defeated most men, let alone a city-bred woman. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, something he wasn't ready to examine too closely. Morning brought clear skies and the challenge of returning to civilization with an injured woman. Jack had spent the night formulating a plan, occasionally dozing but mostly keeping watch. Now, as Belle stirred awake, he was already preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and the last of his hardtack. "Morning," he greeted her. "How's the ankle feeling?" Belle winced as she shifted position. "Still painful, but the swelling seems less." Jack nodded, pleased by her matter-of-fact assessment rather than complaints. "Good, I'm going to wrap it properly before we head out." He produced a roll of bandage from his supplies. "This will support it, but you won't be walking far. I'll need to get you up on my horse." "I can ride," Belle assured him, sitting up straighter. My father insisted I learn, though I suspect Colorado mountain trails are somewhat different from Boston riding paths. Jack's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Just a bit. He knelt beside her, gently elevating her injured foot to begin wrapping the ankle. His large, calloused hands moved with surprising delicacy as he worked. "We're about 2 days' ride from Timber Creek," he explained as he secured the bandage. "Normally, it'd be quicker, but we'll need to take it slow with your injury. The trail gets narrow in places. You'll ride my stallion. He's sure-footed on mountain paths. I'll lead him and ride the packhorse when the trail allows." Belle nodded, appreciating his straightforward planning. "What about?" "My clothes?" she asked, gesturing to her ruined dress, still damp despite hanging near the fire overnight. "Pack 'em up. You can wear my spare shirt and the trousers rolled up. Not proper ladies' attire, but practical for the journey." Jack's expression remained neutral, but Belle detected a hint of amusement in his blue eyes. "Unless you prefer the dress," Belle surprised him with a small laugh. After 5 days in the wilderness, propriety seems rather less important than practicality. The trousers will be fine. With Jack's help, Belle managed to dress in his spare clothes, the trousers rolled up multiple times at the waist and ankles. She used a length of rope as a belt, creating an outfit that would have scandalized Boston society but served perfectly for mountain travel. Once dressed, she faced the challenge of reaching Jack's horse, which waited patiently outside the cave. Her first attempt at standing put too much weight on her injured ankle, causing her to gasp and stumble. Jack caught her before she could fall, his strong hands steadying her at the waist. "Easy now," he cautioned, his voice gentler than she'd heard before. "Lean on me." Belle nodded, acutely aware of his nearness as she placed her arm around his shoulders. Together, they made their way slowly out of the cave. The bright morning sunlight momentarily blinded her after the dim cave interior. When her vision cleared, Belle gasped at the vista before her. The storm had washed the air clean, revealing mountain peaks stretching to the horizon, their summits touched with snow despite the late spring season. Wildflowers dotted the nearby meadow, their colors vivid against the green grass. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I was too frightened to notice before." Jack followed her gaze, seeing the familiar landscape through new eyes. "That it is," he agreed quietly. "Most folks never see this part of the country. Too busy getting from one place to another to notice what's in between." He helped her to his chestnut stallion, then fashioned a stirrup with interlaced fingers. "Up you go." With his boost, Belle settled into the saddle, arranging herself side-saddle despite the trousers out of ingrained habit. Jack adjusted the stirrups for her and handed her the reins. "His name's Rusty," Jack said, patting the horse's neck. "He's even-tempered, but he responds best to a firm hand. Don't let him know you're nervous, or he'll take advantage." Belle stroked Rusty's mane, appreciating the solid strength of the animal beneath her. "We'll get along fine," she assured Jack, straightening her posture and taking the reins with quiet confidence. Jack nodded approvingly, then mounted the packhorse. With Belle's meager possessions and the remnants of their supplies secured, they set out along a narrow trail that wound down through the forested mountainside. The journey was slow but steadier than Jack had anticipated. Belle proved to be a capable horsewoman, handling Rusty with natural ease despite her unfamiliarity with mountain trails. When the path narrowed too much for 2 horses abreast, Jack dismounted to lead Rusty on foot, his hand occasionally touching Belle's leg to stabilize her on particularly treacherous stretches. They stopped at midday by a clear mountain stream to rest and water the horses. Jack helped Belle dismount, supporting her weight as she stretched her uninjured leg. "You ride well," he commented as he spread a blanket on a flat rock for her to sit on. "Most Eastern ladies I've encountered treat horses like furniture with legs." Belle smiled at the observation. "My father breeds horses outside Boston. I practically grew up in the stables, much to my mother's dismay." She accepted the jerky and dried fruit Jack offered. "She was determined to make a proper lady of me, but father always indulged my less conventional interests." Like teaching school in California, Jack asked, seating himself on a nearby rock. Belle nodded, her expression growing wistful. I want to do something meaningful with my life. Boston society offers little opportunity for that, at least for women. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in San Bernardino, it seemed like Providence. It's a growing town, Jack acknowledged. Lot of families moving in looking to give their children education beyond basic reading and ciphering. You know it, Belle asked, surprised. Jack nodded, his gaze distant. Passed through a few years back driving cattle, nice enough place, different from this country though hotter, drier. He looked at her thoughtfully. Still planning to go after all this, the question gave Belle pause. The ordeal had shaken her confidence but not her determination. Yes, she said finally. Though perhaps I'll arrange for an armed escort next time. Jack's mouth quirked in that almost smile again. Wise decision. He stood, stretching his tall frame. We should move on. There's a decent camping spot about 4 hours ahead, near Copper Creek. Has good shelter and fishing. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the trail gradually descending as they left the higher elevations. Belle found herself studying Jack's broad back as he walked ahead, leading her horse. There was an easy strength in his movements, a confidence born of intimate familiarity with this harsh but beautiful land. Have you always lived in Colorado? She asked during a brief rest. Jack adjusted Rusty's saddle before answering. Since '66. Came west after Appomattox like a lot of soldiers, didn't have much waiting back east. You fought for the Union? Belle ventured. Jack nodded once. Massachusetts 20th, saw more than my share at Gettysburg and after. His tone discouraged further questions on the topic. You're too young to remember much of the war, I expect. I was 11 when it ended, Belle said softly, but my older brother fought, he didn't come home. She hesitated, then added, Is that why you became a tracker, after the war? Jack secured a loose strap on the saddle before answering. Seemed natural. I'd done scouting during the campaigns, found I preferred the company of mountains to most people. He glanced up at her with those startlingly blue eyes. No offense meant. None taken, Belle assured him, understanding more about this quiet man than he'd explicitly shared. The war had marked a generation of men, leaving scars both visible and hidden. Jack Taylor had found his healing in the solitude of the wilderness. By late afternoon, they reached the camping spot Jack had mentioned. A small clearing beside a stream offered flat ground for sleeping and rocks arranged in a crude fire pit, evidence of previous travelers. This looks like heaven compared to that cave, Belle commented as Jack helped her dismount. He steadied her with a hand at her waist, lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. It's a good spot, protected from the wind, plenty of water. He nodded toward the stream. Might even catch us some trout for supper if you're partial to fish. At this point, I'd consider pine needles a delicacy, Belle admitted with a smile. But trout sounds wonderful. While Jack tended to the horses, Belle set about making their camp as comfortable as possible, limited by her mobility but determined to contribute. She arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire pit and sorted through their meager supplies, taking inventory of what remained. Jack returned with an armful of firewood to find her sitting by the prepared fire pit, methodically separating coffee grounds into careful portions. Rationing. He asked, arranging the wood. Belle nodded. I thought it sensible to plan for the remainder of our journey. We have enough coffee for 4 more meals if we're frugal. Jack struck a match, lighting the kindling he'd placed under the larger logs. Good thinking. Though with luck, we'll reach Timber Creek by tomorrow evening. Town's got a decent hotel and a restaurant that serves passable food. A real bed sounds like unimaginable luxury, Belle sighed, watching the flames catch and grow. Jack straightened, brushing off his hands. I'll try for those trout now before we lose the light. He returned half an hour later with 3 decent-sized fish, already cleaned and ready for cooking. Belle watched with appreciation as he skewered them on green sticks and positioned them over the fire with practiced ease. You make it look simple, she commented. "I fear I would starve if left to my own devices in this wilderness." Jack turned the fish to cook evenly. "You managed 5 days on your own. That's more than most could do." He glanced at her with something like respect. "Found water, made shelter, kept moving. Those are the essentials. The rest is just refinement." The compliment warmed Belle more than she expected. "I had help from books, actually. I've always been fond of adventure stories, Cooper, Twain." Father called them unsuitable for a young lady, which naturally made them irresistible. The corner of Jack's mouth lifted. "Books are fine teachers, but experience is better. You've got both now." They ate the trout with the last of Jack's hardtack, the simple meal more satisfying than any fancy dinner Belle could remember. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. Belle tried to hide her shivering, but Jack noticed immediately. "Cold nights in the mountains, even in spring," he commented, adding more wood to the fire. He hesitated, then shrugged off his leather jacket. "Here, this will help." Belle started to protest, but the genuine concern in his expression stopped her. She accepted the jacket with a grateful smile. "Thank you, but won't you be cold? I'm used to it." Jack settled back against his saddle, stretching his long legs toward the fire. "Besides, I've got this." He pulled a silver flask from his saddlebag, uncorking it and taking a small sip before offering it to her. "Whiskey warms the blood." Belle hesitated only briefly before accepting. The liquor burned a fiery path down her throat, making her cough slightly, but spread a pleasant warmth through her chest. "Not quite the sherry served at Boston's social gatherings," she observed, returning the flask. Jack's low chuckle surprised her, the first real laugh she'd heard from him. "I expect not." A comfortable silence settled between them as they watched the flames dance. The vast sky above was carpeted with stars, more brilliant than Belle had ever seen in the city. "It's so beautiful here," she said softly. "Dangerous, yes, but beautiful in a way that makes the danger seem almost worthwhile." Jack followed her gaze upward. "That's the mountains for you. They'll kill you if you don't respect them, but they've got a beauty that gets in your blood." He stoked the fire thoughtfully. "Makes it hard to imagine living anywhere else once you've known it." "Is that why you stayed?" After the war, Jack considered the question longer than Belle expected. "Partly," he admitted finally, "and partly because there wasn't much waiting back east. Family farm was gone, parents passed during the war. Figured I'd try my hand at ranching, but never quite gathered the stake to buy my own spread." He shrugged. "Tracking pays well enough, gives me freedom." "Freedom is valuable," Belle agreed. "Though so is connection. Don't you ever get lonely?" The question hung in the air between them, more personal than anything they'd discussed before. Jack took another sip from his flask before answering. "Sometimes," he acknowledged quietly. "But loneliness in towns feels worse than solitude in mountains. At least out here, the silence makes sense." Belle nodded, understanding more than she could express. Despite her social upbringing, she had often felt isolated among Boston's polite society, surrounded by people yet fundamentally alone. "I should check your ankle," Jack said, clearly changing the subject. "See if the swelling's gone down any." Belle extended her leg, allowing him to unwrap the bandage and gently examine the injury. His calloused fingers were surprisingly gentle against her skin. "Looking better," he pronounced. "Still needs time to heal properly, but the wrapping's helping." He efficiently re-bandaged the ankle, his touch clinical but not impersonal. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." Belle nodded, suddenly aware of how exhaustion weighed on her. "Good night, Jack, and thank you not just for the rescue but for," she gestured vaguely, "all of this. The care you've taken." Jack looked momentarily discomfited by her gratitude. "Just doing what needs doing," he said, his voice gruff. "Sleep well, Belle." As Belle settled into her bedroll, wrapped in Jack's leather jacket that carried the faint scent of tobacco and pine, she found herself studying him across the firelight. He was unlike any man she had known in Boston, direct, unpolished, with none of the practiced charm of society gentlemen. Yet there was a fundamental decency in him, an authenticity that drew her more than any polished manners could. For his part, Jack was acutely aware of Belle's presence across the fire. He had rescued lost travelers before, but never had one affected him quite this way. Perhaps it was her surprising resilience or the intelligence that shone in her hazel eyes. Or perhaps it was simply that Belle Sutton represented everything he had left behind: civilization, refinement, a world of possibilities beyond the next mountain range. Morning came with the cheerful gurgle of the stream and birdsong from the surrounding trees. Belle awoke to find Jack already up, tending a small fire with coffee brewing. Her injured ankle felt significantly better, the swelling noticeably reduced. "Morning," Jack greeted her, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "Sleep all right," Belle accepted the coffee gratefully. "Better than I have in days. The ankle feels much improved," Jack nodded approvingly. "Good, we've got a full day's travel ahead. If we make good time, we might reach Timber Creek by nightfall." They broke camp efficiently, Belle contributing despite Jack's insistence that she rest her ankle. "I'm not completely helpless," she informed him, rolling up their bedding with practiced movements. "And I won't improve by doing nothing." Jack conceded with a nod, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Fair enough. But tell me if the ankle starts bothering you too much. No sense undoing the healing that's started." The day's journey took them through changing terrain as they descended further from the high country. Pine forests gave way to more open meadows dotted with aspen groves, their leaves shimmering silver green in the spring breeze. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in splashes of color: purple lupine, orange paintbrush, yellow columbine. Belle found herself entranced by the landscape's beauty, momentarily forgetting the discomfort of her ankle and the lingering weakness from her ordeal. "It's like riding through a painting," she commented as they paused to rest the horses by a small lake. "I've never seen anything like it." Jack watched her face as she took in the scenery, finding unexpected pleasure in her appreciation. "Most travelers passing through are too focused on getting where they're going, they miss all this." "I can understand why you stayed," Belle said softly. "There's something honest about this country. It doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is." Jack nodded, unexpectedly moved by her perception. "That's it exactly." Their path through the afternoon took them along an old mining trail that wound down toward the valley where Timber Creek nestled. The trail was well maintained but narrow in places, requiring Jack to lead Belle's horse on foot around the more treacherous turns. "We're making good time," he commented during a brief rest. "Another 3 hours should see us to town if nothing delays us." As if summoned by his words, delay appeared in the form of 3 riders emerging from a side trail ahead. Jack tensed instantly, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Belle," he said quietly, "stay on Rusty and be ready to ride hard if I tell you to." The approaching riders slowed as they spotted Jack and Belle. They were rough-looking men, trail-worn and heavily armed. The leader, a scar-faced man with a red bandana, raised his hand in greeting. "Afternoon, folks," he called, his friendly tone at odds with his calculating gaze. "Don't often see travelers on this stretch." "Heading to Timber Creek," Jack replied neutrally, his stance casual but alert. "Been up hunting." Belle understood instantly that Jack was concealing their true circumstances. She kept her expression neutral, though her heart raced. Were these men from the gang that had attacked her stagecoach? The scarred man's eyes lingered on Belle, taking in her unusual attire and the fine boots that marked her as something other than a local. "Successful trip, was it?" "Successful enough," Jack answered. "Don't mean to be unfriendly, but we're looking to reach town before dark." The man smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "No offense taken, roads can be dangerous these days. Heard tell of a stagecoach being robbed up near Serpent Pass just last week." His gaze shifted meaningfully to Belle. "Terrible business." Jack's posture remained relaxed, but Belle could sense the tension coiled within him. "Hadn't heard," he said evenly. "We've been in the high country a while." The man nodded slowly. "Well, you folks take care now. Maybe we'll see you in town." With a tip of his hat, he signaled his companions and they continued past, riding at an unhurried pace. Jack waited until they were well out of sight before speaking. "Farley gang," he confirmed quietly. "The one with the scar is Hank Davis, Farley's second in command." Belle's hands tightened on the reins. "They were part of the group that attacked my stagecoach, almost certainly." Jack's expression was grim as he mounted the pack horse. "They're heading toward town, which complicates things." "They didn't seem to recognize me," Belle observed. "Hard to say." "You look different now, dressed in men's clothes, hair down instead of pinned up, but we can't count on that." Jack urged his horse forward. "We need to reach town before they have time to spread word that we're coming." They rode at a faster pace now, Jack pushing the horses as much as he dared on the rough trail. Belle could see the worry in the set of his shoulders, the vigilant way he scanned the path ahead. "What will we do in town?" she asked during a brief stop to water the horses. Jack considered their options. "Sheriff Whitman's a good man, but he doesn't have the manpower to take on the whole Farley gang. Best play is to get you safely to the hotel, then figure out our next move." "Our next move," Belle echoed, catching the plural. Jack met her gaze directly. "I'm not leaving you unprotected with those men around, not until I know you're safe." The declaration warmed her even as it emphasized the danger they faced. "Thank you," she said simply. They reached Timber Creek just as the sun was beginning to set, painting the small settlement in golden light. Belle's first impression was of a frontier town in transition log cabins alongside newer frame buildings, a proper church with a small steeple, a two-story hotel that proudly advertised clean rooms and hot meals. Jack led them directly to a sturdy building marked with a sheriff's star. "Wait here," he instructed, helping Belle dismount before entering the building. He returned moments later with a stocky, gray-haired man wearing a tarnished badge. The sheriff's shrewd eyes assessed Belle quickly. "Miss Sutton, I presume," he said, touching his hat brim. "Sheriff Whitman." "Mighty glad to see you alive. We'd about given up hope." Belle accepted his outstretched hand. "Mr. Taylor proved quite persistent in his search." The sheriff nodded. "Jack's the best tracker in 3 territories. If anyone could find you, it'd be him." He glanced around the street, which was growing busy as evening approached. "Let's get you settled at the hotel. We can talk there." He led them to the 2-story building Belle had noticed earlier. The hotel owner, a plump woman with a no-nonsense demeanor, took one look at Belle's condition and sprang into action. "Land's sakes, child, you look half dead on your feet. Martha," she called to a young maid. "Hot bath in room 3, quick as you can, and bring up some stew and biscuits." She turned to Jack and the sheriff. "You gentlemen can wait in the dining room. This young lady needs tending to." Before Belle could protest, she found herself whisked upstairs to a small but clean room where a copper tub was soon filled with steaming water. The luxury of soap and hot water after nearly a week in the wilderness brought tears to her eyes. Clean, fed, and dressed in a borrowed nightgown and robe, Belle felt human again. A knock at her door revealed Sheriff Whitman and Jack, both looking grave. "May we come in, Miss Sutton?" The sheriff asked. "We need to discuss your situation." Belle invited them to sit, settling herself in the room's single armchair while the men took positions on straight-backed wooden chairs. "Davis and his men are at the saloon," Whitman began without preamble. "They haven't made any trouble yet, but their presence concerns me." "Do they know I'm here?" Belle asked. The sheriff shrugged. "Hard to say. News travels fast in a small town, but Jack was careful bringing you in. My deputy says they've been asking questions about recent travelers, though." Jack leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're the only witness who could identify them from the stagecoach robbery. That makes you dangerous to them." "I barely saw their faces," Belle protested. "They wore bandanas." "Doesn't matter," Whitman said. "They can't risk it." "If federal marshals get your testimony, it would strengthen their case considerably." "What do you suggest?" Belle asked, acutely aware of her vulnerability. The men exchanged glances before Jack spoke. "The morning stage to Denver leaves at 8. I think you should be on it." "From Denver, you can catch the train east." "East," Belle frowned. But my position in San Bernardino, Miss Sutton, the sheriff interrupted gently. Right now, staying alive is more important than that teaching job. The Farley gang won't stop looking for you if they know you're a witness. Belle's heart sank as she recognized the truth in his words. Her dreams of independence, of making a difference in the growing West, seemed to be slipping away. I'll escort you to Denver personally, Jack offered. Make sure you reach the train safely. And then what? Belle asked, unable to keep disappointment from her voice. Return to Boston, pretend none of this ever happened. Jack's blue eyes held her steadily. Sometimes retreat is the wisest course. It doesn't have to be forever. The sheriff stood, signaling an end to the discussion. I'll arrange for the stage ticket and have a deputy watching the hotel tonight. Try to get some rest, Miss Sutton. Tomorrow will be another long day. After the sheriff departed, Jack lingered, seemingly reluctant to leave. I know it's not what you wanted, he said quietly. But it's the safest option. Belle nodded, too tired to argue further. I understand the logic, even if I don't like it. For what it's worth, Jack added, I think you would have made a fine teacher in San Bernardino. You've got the spirit for frontier life despite what happened. The unexpected compliment brought warmth to Belle's cheeks. Thank you for saying that, and for everything else. Jack moved toward the door but paused with his hand on the knob. I'll be in the lobby all night. If you need anything, just call out. After he left, Belle sat by the window, watching the town's main street as lamps were lit and evening activities commenced. The saloon across the way hummed with activity, piano music and raucous laughter occasionally spilling into the street. Somewhere in that building were the men who had attacked her stagecoach, who had killed fellow passengers and now threatened her future. The injustice of it kindled a slow anger in her breast. Why should she be the one to flee, to abandon her plans and dreams? These men had already taken enough from her possessions, her sense of security. Must they take her future as well? Belle slept fitfully, her dreams filled with shadowy pursuers and endless mountain paths. She woke before dawn, her mind made up. She would not run east with her tail between her legs. There must be another solution. A soft knock at her door announced Jack's presence. He entered bearing a tray with coffee and toast, his expression concerned as he took in her tired appearance. Rough night? He asked, setting down the tray. Belle nodded, accepting the coffee gratefully. I've been thinking about our situation. Our situation? Jack raised an eyebrow. Yes, ours, because you're involved now too. Belle met his gaze directly. I don't want to go east, Jack, he sighed, running a hand through his dark hair. Belle, hear me out, she interrupted. These men have taken enough from me already. I refuse to let them take my future too. She set down her cup with determination. There must be another way. Jack studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. What exactly did you have in mind? The federal marshal is coming next month, correct? What if I stayed somewhere safe until then? Somewhere the Farley gang wouldn't think to look for me. Where did you have in mind? Jack asked, his tone neutral. Belle hesitated, then pressed forward. Your cabin. You mentioned you have a place in the mountains. Jack's eyebrows shot up. That's... He began, then shook his head. Belle, do you understand what you're suggesting? A young woman, alone with a man she barely knows in a remote cabin. Your reputation would be destroyed. My reputation, Belle said dryly, is hardly my primary concern when my life is at stake. Besides, who would know? You said yourself it's remote. Jack paced the small room, clearly uncomfortable with the proposal. It's not just proper, it's dangerous in other ways. My cabin is primitive, one room, minimal comforts, and there's still your ankle to consider. My ankle is healing well, Belle countered, and I've just spent 5 days in the wilderness. I think I can manage a primitive cabin. Her voice softened. Jack, please, I can't go back east. Not now, maybe not ever, that life. It's not mine anymore. Jack stopped pacing, studying her with those penetrating blue eyes. You've changed, he observed quietly. Yes, Belle agreed simply. I have. A long silence stretched between them as Jack considered. Finally, he nodded once. All right. But we do this carefully. We need supplies and we need to leave town without being noticed. Relief flooded through Belle. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jack cautioned. "We're not out of danger. Get dressed while I talk to the sheriff." "He won't like this plan, but he might help us implement it." Jack was right. Sheriff Whitman did not approve of the new plan. He argued forcefully against it when Jack explained Belle's decision in the hotel's small dining room. "It's damn foolishness," the sheriff insisted, keeping his voice low to avoid being overheard. "The girl's been through an ordeal. She's not thinking clearly." "She's thinking more clearly than you might expect," Jack countered, "and she's made up her mind." The sheriff studied Jack's face, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't like you, Taylor. You've always been the sensible one. What's changed?" Jack met the older man's gaze steadily. "Nothing's changed. I'm still doing what I believe is right." Whitman sighed heavily. "There's no talking either of you out of this, is there?" "No," Jack confirmed. "But we could use your help getting out of town unnoticed." The sheriff rubbed his graying mustache thoughtfully. "Davis and his men are still at the saloon, sleeping off last night's whiskey. They won't stir before noon," he considered for a moment. "I could arrange a wagon, say it's carrying supplies to the Henderson place. You and the girl could hide under canvas until you're clear of town." Jack nodded. "That might work. We'll need supplies for a month or more." "I'll have my deputy handle it," Whitman agreed reluctantly. "But Taylor, you're taking a hell of a risk, not just with her safety but with your reputation and hers." "I know," Jack acknowledged quietly, "but sometimes the greater risk is in doing nothing." Within 2 hours, they had a plan in motion. Belle, dressed in the men's clothes Jack had provided, her hair tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, helped load supplies into a wagon behind the general store. Sheriff Whitman's deputy, a young man named Rogers, would drive the wagon out of town as if on a routine delivery. "Once you're past Willow Creek, you can take over," the deputy explained to Jack. "I'll head back to town and no one will be the wiser." The sheriff approached as they finished loading, his expression still troubled. "Davis was asking questions at the hotel this morning, wanted to know if a young woman had checked in recently. The owner told him no, which is technically true since you never properly registered." Jack's face hardened. "They're suspicious." "Certainly curious," Whitman agreed. "I'd suggest you get moving soon." Belle climbed into the wagon bed, concealing herself beneath canvas and supplies. Jack joined her after a final word with the sheriff. The space was cramped and dark, smelling of flour, coffee, and leather. "Comfortable?" Jack whispered as the wagon began to move. "Remarkably, yes," Belle replied softly. "After a cave floor, this feels quite luxurious." She felt rather than saw Jack's silent chuckle. "It's a 2-hour ride to where we'll meet the deputy. Try to rest if you can." The journey passed in tense silence, broken only by the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional comment from Deputy Rogers to passing travelers. Belle found herself acutely aware of Jack's proximity in the confined space, his shoulder pressed against hers each time the wagon hit a bump in the road. After what seemed an eternity, the wagon stopped. "All clear," came Roger's voice. No one followed. Belle emerged from under the canvas, blinking in the bright sunlight. They had stopped in a small clearing beside a stream, well off the main road. "Thank you, deputy," she said sincerely as the young man helped her down from the wagon. Rogers tipped his hat. "Just be careful, Miss Sutton. The Farley gang doesn't give up easily." After the deputy departed with instructions to tell the sheriff they had gotten away safely, Jack transferred their supplies to his packhorse and helped Belle mount Rusty. "My cabin's another 4 hours' ride," he explained. "It's up in the foothills, hard to find if you don't know what you're looking for." The trail Jack chose wound through dense forest, occasionally crossing streams or skirting rocky outcroppings. It was clear he was deliberately taking a circuitous route to confuse any potential pursuit. "You're very cautious," Belle observed during a brief rest. Jack nodded, scanning the path behind them. "The mountains taught me that. Better cautious than dead." They reached Jack's cabin as afternoon shadows lengthened across the small clearing where it stood. Belle's first impression was of a sturdy, if simple, structure, logs chinked with mud and moss. a stone chimney, a small covered porch. It nestled against the hillside as if it had grown naturally from the landscape. "It's not much," Jack said, almost apologetically, as he helped her dismount. "Built it myself 5 years ago. It's perfect," Belle replied sincerely. The little cabin represented safety, a refuge from both the wilderness and human threats. Truly. The interior was simply furnished: a table and 2 chairs, a stone fireplace with cooking hooks, a narrow bed in one corner, and shelves holding books, supplies, and tools. Everything was meticulously organized, reflecting Jack's methodical nature. "You can take the bed," Jack said, depositing their supplies on the table. "I'll use my bedroll by the fire." Belle started to protest, but Jack's expression brooked no argument. "Your ankle's still healing," he reminded her. "You need proper rest." The next few days established a routine as they settled into cohabitation. Jack hunted and fished, teaching Belle the basics of both skills. Her ankle continued to improve, allowing her to take short walks around the clearing and help with camp chores. In the evenings, they read by lamplight. Jack had a small but eclectic collection of books that revealed a thoughtful mind behind his taciturn exterior. Despite the circumstances that had brought them together, Belle found herself enjoying this simple existence. There was honesty in their daily tasks, a direct connection between effort and reward that had been absent in her Boston life. "I've never been happier," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the western sky. "Isn't that strange? After everything that's happened, I mean." Jack considered her words, his pipe sending fragrant smoke curling into the twilight air. "Not strange," he said finally. "Some people are better suited to this life than city living. Maybe you're one of them." Belle smiled, drawing her shawl closer against the evening chill. "Perhaps I am, though I suspect it's not just the place that makes the difference." Jack glanced at her, something flickering in his eyes before he looked away. "The danger's not past, Belle. We shouldn't forget that." "I haven't forgotten," she assured him. "But I refuse to live in fear every moment. That would be letting them win in another way." Their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Jack taught Belle wilderness skills: how to read animal tracks, identify edible plants, navigate by stars. She proved an apt pupil, her natural intelligence compensating for lack of experience. In turn, Belle brought order and warmth to Jack's Spartan cabin. She fashioned curtains from spare fabric, organized his books alphabetically, and added wild flowers to the table. Small touches that transformed the shelter into a home. They were careful to maintain proprieties despite their unusual situation. Jack was unfailingly respectful, never crossing the invisible boundaries that proper society would have erected between them. Yet Belle found herself increasingly aware of him in ways that had nothing to do with propriety: the strength in his hands as he split firewood, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness with which he tended her still healing ankle. 2 weeks into their exile, a spring storm brought torrential rain that confined them to the cabin for 3 days. The forced proximity intensified the awareness growing between them. They played cards, read aloud to each other, and shared stories of their vastly different lives. "Why did you never marry?" Belle asked during a lull in conversation, immediately regretting the personal nature of the question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." To her surprise, Jack didn't seem offended. He considered the question while stoking the fire. "Came close once," he admitted. "About 4 years back. Sarah was a widow with a small ranch outside Timber Creek. Good woman, practical." "What happened?" Belle asked softly. Jack shrugged, his expression distant. "Her brother came out from Pennsylvania, convinced her to sell the ranch and move back east with her boy. Made sense for her: better schools, easier life." He poked at the fire again. "I couldn't follow. Tried town life once after the war, didn't take." Belle nodded, understanding more than he had explicitly said. "And since then, I've kept to myself mostly. Tracking, hunting, the occasional cattle drive when money gets tight." Jack glanced at her. "What about you? No Boston gentleman caught your fancy, Belle smiled wryly. Several tried. Mother paraded eligible bachelors through our parlor with alarming regularity. She sighed. They were nice enough men, I suppose, just predictable. Lives all mapped out the right clubs, the right neighborhood, the right number of children. She shook her head. I wanted something more, something real. And teaching in San Bernardino was going to provide that. Jack asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. I thought it might, Belle admitted. A chance to build something to make a difference, to see if I could stand on my own. Jack studied her thoughtfully. You're doing that now, am I? Belle laughed softly. Hidden away in a cabin, dependent on your protection and skills. You survived alone in the wilderness for 5 days, Jack reminded her. You've adapted to this life faster than anyone I've seen, and you haven't complained once about conditions that would have most Eastern ladies in hysterics. His gaze held hers. I'd say you're standing pretty well on your own. The simple compliment warmed Belle more than the fire. Thank you for seeing that. As the rain continued to drum on the cabin roof, their conversation deepened. Jack spoke of his childhood on a small Massachusetts farm, his reluctant enlistment in the Union Army, the horrors of Gettysburg that still haunted his dreams. Belle shared her frustrations with Boston society's limitations for women, her love of learning, and her determination to create a meaningful life on her own terms. By the time the storm cleared, something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful distance Jack had maintained began to dissolve, replaced by a growing closeness that neither acknowledged directly but both felt acutely. A week later, Jack returned from hunting to find Belle outside the cabin, practicing with his revolver. She had set up cans on a fallen log and was taking careful aim, her face set in concentration. Your stance is too rigid, he commented, setting down his game bag. You're fighting the recoil instead of absorbing it. Belle lowered the gun, turning to him with a sheepish smile. I found it while cleaning. I thought I should learn, given our situation. Jack nodded, surprised not by her initiative but by his own approval of it. Most men would be horrified at the idea of a lady handling firearms. Good thinking, but your technique needs work. He stepped behind her, adjusting her stance with light touches to her shoulders and arms. Relax your upper body, let your weight settle into your legs. His voice was close to her ear, his chest nearly touching her back. Breathe out as you squeeze the trigger, don't pull it. Belle was acutely aware of his proximity, the warmth of his body behind hers, the gentle pressure of his hands guiding her arms. She followed his instructions, squeezing the trigger on the exhale. The can flew off the log with a satisfying ping. I did it. She exclaimed, turning to him with delight. They found themselves face to face, mere inches apart. Jack's blue eyes darkened as they dropped to her lips, then quickly returned to meet her gaze. For one breathless moment, Belle thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, she realized with sudden clarity. Instead, he stepped back, creating distance between them. Good shot, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Keep practicing. That evening, tension hummed between them like a tightly strung wire. They ate the rabbit stew Jack had prepared in uncharacteristic silence, both hyper-aware of the other's presence in the small cabin. Finally, Belle set down her spoon. Jack, she began, I think we should acknowledge what's happening. He looked up, wariness and something else, hope perhaps, in his expression. What do you mean, between us? Belle clarified, her heart pounding but her voice steady. There's something changing, isn't there? Jack was silent for a long moment, his gaze dropping to his hands. Belle, he finally said, your life and mine are very different. Once the marshal arrives and the Farley gang is dealt with, you'll go on to San Bernardino or back to Boston. Either way, this, he gestured to the cabin around them, is just temporary. Is it? Belle challenged gently. What if I don't want it to be temporary? Jack's head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. You can't mean that. You had plans, dreams, a teaching position waiting. Plans change, Belle said simply. People change. These weeks here they've shown me what I truly want. She gathered her courage. Who I truly want. The confession hung in the air between them. Jack stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace with his back to her. His shoulders were tense, hands clenched at his sides. "You don't know what you're saying," he said, his voice tight. "You've been through a trauma. Isolated with only me for company. It's natural to form attachments in such circumstances, but they're not real." Belle felt a flash of anger at his dismissal. "Don't tell me what I feel is not real," she said, rising from her chair. "I may be younger than you, Jack Taylor, but I know my own mind." She moved to stand beside him at the fireplace, forcing him to look at her. "If you don't share these feelings, simply say so, but don't insult me by suggesting I don't know my own heart." Jack's expression softened as he met her determined gaze. "It's not that," he admitted quietly. "God knows it's not that." "Then what?" Belle pressed. Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. "Belle, you deserve better than a worn-out tracker with nothing to offer but a one-room cabin and a life of hardship." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Belle asked, moving closer. "What if this life, simple, honest, close to nature, is exactly what I want? What if you are who I want?" The naked vulnerability in her words broke something in Jack's careful reserve. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb gently tracing her cheekbone. "You're sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Belle leaned into his touch. "I've never been more certain of anything." The kiss, when it finally came, was gentle at first, tentative, questioning. Then Belle's arms wound around Jack's neck, and the last of his resistance crumbled. He pulled her closer, deepening the kiss with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jack rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. "I hope so," Belle replied, her lips curving in a smile against his. That night, propriety demanded they maintain separate sleeping arrangements, but something fundamental had shifted. Jack's protective instinct toward Belle now intertwined with deeper emotions, and Belle's admiration for his strength and skills had blossomed into something far more profound. The following weeks brought them closer still. They spoke of futures, tentative plans that grew more concrete with each passing day. Jack admitted his long-held dream of starting a small ranch, breeding the sturdy mountain horses he admired. Belle spoke of teaching the children of nearby homesteads, perhaps starting a small school of her own. "We could build a proper house," Jack suggested one evening as they sat by the fire, Belle's head resting against his shoulder. "2 rooms at least, maybe 3, thinking ahead." Belle smiled at the implication. "I'd like that. Something simple but well built, with bookshelves." "Plenty of bookshelves," Jack agreed, pressing a kiss to her hair. They were so absorbed in their newfound happiness that the arrival of riders in the clearing caught them completely by surprise. Jack was outside chopping wood when Belle heard his warning shout. "Inside! Now!" His voice held an urgency that sent her scrambling for the cabin. Through the window, she saw 3 riders approaching, the scarred man, Davis, among them. Jack stood with his axe in hand, positioning himself between the cabin and the approaching threat. Belle reached for the loaded revolver Jack now kept on the table. Her hand trembled slightly, but she remembered his lessons: breathe, stay calm, aim true. Outside, Jack faced the intruders with outward calm that belied his racing heart. "You're trespassing, Davis," he called as the riders approached. "This is private property." Davis smiled unpleasantly. "Now, is that any way to greet visitors, Taylor?" "We've just been out hunting and thought we'd pay a friendly call." His eyes flicked to the cabin. "Heard you might have company these days." "Whatever you heard was wrong," Jack replied evenly. "Just me up here, same as always." Davis dismounted, his companions following suit. All 3 men were armed, hands resting casually near their holstered revolvers. "That's funny, because word in town is you and that stagecoach girl disappeared the same day." He took a step forward. "Federal marshals due next week. Be a shame if the only witness to our little misunderstanding wasn't around to talk to him." Jack's grip tightened on the axe. He was outnumbered and likely outgunned, but he had the advantage of knowing the terrain. "I'll say this once more, turn around and ride out and there won't be trouble." Davis laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Oh, there's already trouble, Taylor. Question is how much?" His hand moved to his gun. "Now, why don't you invite us inside for coffee? I'd like to meet this schoolteacher everyone's talking about." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Jack knew his odds against 3 armed men were poor, but he would die before letting them reach Belle. The cabin door opened behind him. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Davis," Belle's clear voice rang out. "I'm right here." Jack's heart sank as Belle stepped onto the porch, the revolver steady in her hands. He had taught her well her stance was perfect, the gun aimed directly at Davis's chest. Davis's scarred face registered surprise, then amusement. "Well now, ain't this sweet? The little lady's learned to shoot." He directed his next words to Jack. "You've been busy, Taylor, teaching more than just tracking skills, I see." "State your business and go," Belle said calmly, though Jack could hear the slight tremor beneath her composed exterior. "The sheriff knows exactly where we are." This was a bluff. They had maintained complete secrecy about their location, but Davis hesitated, clearly reassessing the situation. "My business," he said finally, "is making sure certain stories don't reach the wrong ears." His cold gaze fixed on Belle. "You saw something you shouldn't have, Miss Sutton. That makes you a problem." "I saw men attacking innocent travelers," Belle replied steadily, "and I'll testify to that effect when the marshal arrives." One of Davis's companions shifted nervously. "Hank, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Davis snapped. His hand moved closer to his holster. "I didn't ride all this way to leave empty-handed." Jack tensed, prepared to launch himself at Davis the moment the man drew. "Last chance, Davis, ride away now." The tension shattered with the distant sound of hoofbeats, several horses approaching at speed. Davis's head turned toward the sound, momentarily distracted. It was all the opening Jack needed. He lunged forward, swinging the axe handle at Davis's gun hand just as the man began to draw. There was a sickening crack as the heavy wood connected with bone. Davis howled in pain, his gun dropping to the ground. His companions reached for their weapons but froze at Belle's command. "Don't move," she ordered, her voice ringing with authority despite her fear. "I may be a schoolteacher, but I can still put a bullet in you." The approaching riders burst into the clearing. Sheriff Whitman and 3 deputies, rifles ready. "Everyone stay where you are," the sheriff bellowed. "Drop those weapons." Davis's men, outmaneuvered and outgunned, complied reluctantly. Davis himself cradled his injured hand, his face contorted with fury and pain. "Perfect timing, Sheriff," Jack commented dryly as the lawman dismounted and began disarming the would-be killers. Whitman snorted. "Wish I could claim brilliant planning, but truth is, we were on our way to warn you. Marshal Johnson arrived early, and we've been rounding up the Farley gang since yesterday." He nodded toward Davis. "These 3 were the only ones unaccounted for. Figured they might be heading your way." Belle lowered the revolver, her hands beginning to shake now that the immediate danger had passed. Jack moved quickly to her side, taking the gun and wrapping a supportive arm around her waist. "You did good," he murmured. "Real good." "I was terrified," she admitted, leaning against him. "Being brave isn't about not feeling fear," Jack told her softly. "It's about acting despite it, and you, Belle Sutton, are the bravest person I know." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. They returned to Timber Creek, where Belle gave her formal statement to Marshal Johnson, a detailed account of the stagecoach robbery that, combined with evidence gathered from other sources, would ensure the Farley gang faced justice. Word of Belle's ordeal spread through the small community, transforming her from stranger to local hero. The hotel owner insisted she stay free of charge, and townspeople stopped by with gifts and well wishes. Through it all, Jack remained by her side, quiet and supportive. Their relationship, born in crisis and nurtured in isolation, now faced the scrutiny of public attention. Yet rather than wilting under observation, it seemed to strengthen, as if acknowledging their feelings openly had cemented something essential between them. A week after the confrontation at the cabin, Belle sat with Jack on the hotel's small veranda, watching the sunset paint Timber Creek's Main Street in golden hues. The evening stage had arrived earlier, bringing mail and newspapers from Denver. "I received a letter today," Belle said, breaking a comfortable silence between them. "From the school board in San Bernardino." Jack tensed slightly beside her. "Oh, they've given the teaching position to someone else," Belle continued, her tone neutral. Apparently they couldn't wait any longer for a response. Jack studied her profile, trying to gauge her reaction. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I know how much that opportunity meant to you." Belle turned to face him, surprising him with a smile. "The strange thing is, I'm not particularly disappointed." She reached for his hand. "Plans change, people change." Jack's fingers intertwined with hers. "They do at that." He hesitated, then asked the question that had been on his mind since their return to town. "What will you do now?" Belle's smile deepened. "Well, I've had an interesting offer from Mrs. Henderson at the general store. She mentioned that Timber Creek has enough children now to warrant a proper school, but no teacher." Her eyes held his. "She suggested I might consider the position." Hope flared in Jack's chest, but he kept his expression carefully neutral. "Timber Creek's a far cry from San Bernardino, smaller, less developed." "True," Belle acknowledged, "but it has certain advantages San Bernardino lacks." "Such as?" Jack prompted, his voice rougher than he intended. Belle's free hand came up to touch his cheek. "A certain tracker who's stolen my heart, for one, and mountains I've grown rather fond of, for another." The tension in Jack's shoulders eased as he turned his face to press a kiss into her palm. "Are you sure, Belle? Really sure?" "This life won't be easy." "The worthwhile things rarely are," she replied softly. "Besides, I have plans of my own. Mrs. Henderson mentioned there's a small parcel of land for sale just outside town. Good water, some grazing land." Her eyes twinkled. "Perfect for a small ranch. Perhaps breeding mountain horses." Jack stared at her, momentarily speechless. "You've been planning," he finally managed. "Learning from the best," Belle countered with a smile. "Always be prepared, isn't that what you taught me?" Jack laughed, a rare, full sound that drew glances from passers-by. "I did at that," he sobered, his expression growing serious. "Belle Sutton, when I found you in those mountains, I thought I was just doing my job. I never imagined you'd end up changing my life." "For the better, I hope?" Belle asked, her tone light but her eyes searching his. In answer, Jack reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the fading sunlight. A ring, simple gold with a small pearl, nothing ostentatious but undeniably beautiful. "I've been carrying this since we got back to town," he admitted, "waiting for the right moment. Wondering if you might be willing to take a chance on building a life with me." His blue eyes held hers. "I love you, Belle. Will you marry me?" Belle's eyes filled with tears as she nodded, words momentarily beyond her. When she found her voice again, it held all the certainty she felt. "Yes. With all my heart, yes." As Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, Belle thought of the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of being lost in the mountains to the joy of being found not just physically rescued, but discovered in a deeper sense. In Jack Taylor, she had found not only a protector but a partner who valued her strength, her intelligence, her spirit. The wedding took place 2 months later in Timber Creek's white clapboard church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, curious to witness the union of their taciturn tracker and the Eastern lady who had captured his heart. Belle wore a simple dress of ivory silk, ordered from Denver at Mrs. Henderson's insistence. Jack, uncomfortable but handsome in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with Sheriff Whitman standing as his best man. When Belle spoke her vows, her voice carried clearly through the packed church. "I, Belle Sutton, take you, Jack Taylor, to be my lawfully wedded husband. To have and to hold from this day forward. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part." Jack's response was equally clear, though those who knew him well could detect the emotion he fought to control. "I, Jack Taylor, take you, Belle Sutton, to be my lawfully wedded wife. To have and to hold from this day forward." For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. The reception that followed, held in the town's newly completed meeting hall, featured the best food and drink Timber Creek could provide. Belle and Jack moved among their well-wishers, accepting congratulations and good-natured teasing about their unusual courtship. "Never thought I'd see the day Jack Taylor took a wife," commented one old-timer, raising his glass in salute. "Had to be some special woman to manage that." "Special indeed," Jack agreed, his gaze finding Belle across the room where she chatted with the schoolchildren who would soon be her pupils. "Worth tracking through a blizzard, that one." As the celebration continued into the evening, Belle found a moment alone with her new husband on the meeting hall's small porch. The spring night was mild, stars brilliant in the clear mountain sky. "Happy?" Jack asked, his arm around her waist. Belle leaned into his embrace. "Completely." She turned to face him, moonlight silvering her features. "Did you ever imagine when you set out to find a lost Eastern lady that you'd end up with a wife?" Jack shook his head, a smile warming his habitually serious expression. "Never. But then I've learned that life takes unexpected trails." His hand came up to cup her face. "Sometimes they lead to places better than you ever dreamed possible." "Indeed they do," Belle agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him, "and our trail is just beginning." 2 years later, Belle stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Jack demonstrate proper rope technique to their ranch hands. The small breeding operation they had started was beginning to thrive, with their first crop of foals showing the sturdy conformation and intelligence Jack had bred for. The house, as promised, had 3 rooms, a comfortable main room with ample bookshelves, their bedroom, and a smaller room currently being prepared for the baby they expected in the fall. Belle's school in town had flourished as well, with 22 students now attending regularly. As she watched her husband, Belle's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly. Being lost in the mountains had led her to the most profound discovery of her life, not just Jack Taylor, but her own strength and resilience. Her capacity to adapt and thrive in circumstances she could never have imagined. Jack looked up, catching her watching him. With a brief word to the hands, he crossed the yard to join her on the porch. "You should be resting," he chided gently, though his eyes shone with pride as they took in her condition. "I'm perfectly well," Belle assured him, leaning into his embrace as his arm circled her shoulders. "Just admiring the view." Jack followed her gaze across their property, the new barn, the corral where yearlings frolicked, the garden beginning to produce its summer bounty. Beyond lay the mountains where their story had begun, their peaks still snow-capped even in June. "Not bad for a tracker and a schoolteacher," he observed. Belle smiled, thinking of the journey that had brought them here, from fear to safety, from isolation to connection, from being lost to being found in every sense that mattered. "Not bad at all," she agreed softly. "In fact, I'd say it's just about perfect."